Hey guys, it's Dr. J here. Today's video is going to be on fructose consumption. Feel free and smash that like button. Really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Put your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Today's video is going to be on fructose consumption. Fructose is a sugar. It's a sugar. Essentially, it's going to come primarily from fruit. So fructose is going to be, so you have table sugar, which is sucrose, okay? Sucrose is part fructose, part glucose. Now, let's talk about the metabolism of these kinds of sugars. So fructose, primarily found in fruit, is going to get metabolized by the liver preferentially. So 80% of fructose will get metabolized by the liver. Now, when you consume whole food fruit, you get a whole bunch of fiber in with the fructose and a whole bunch of nutrients in with the fructose. So you kind of have this little time release thing that happens, number one. Number two, you get a whole bunch of nutrition coming in there, right? B vitamins, vitamin C, bioflavonoids, and of course the fiber, like I mentioned earlier, time releases everything. Now, whole food fruits have very low levels of fructose. Berries, those kind of things, green apples, have less fructose. The higher, typically on the glycemic scale, you go up, the more tropical the fruit is, bananas, pineapples, papayas, mangoes, you're going to have more fructose. Now, the more insulin resistant you are, the less fructose you should be consuming a day. 15 grams or less, on average 25 grams or less per a relative healthy person. So the more active you are, the more you can handle fructose. Fructose gets metabolized by the liver preferentially. Once the liver gets saturated with fructose, some of the muscles can handle some of the fructose too. You start to get that fructose starts getting converted to fat. And that fat starts getting deposited in the liver, and you start to get what's called a non-alcoholic fatty liver. This is important. So you hear all these, they call it NASH or non-alcoholic fatty liver issues. You start to see liver enzymes go up. As the liver gets saturated with its glucose, can't store any stored fructose. It converts it all to fat. Once it's all converted to fat, you start getting an upregulation of these JNKY enzymes, junk enzymes. Is a sign of inflammation. And then you start to have systemic insulin resistance occur because the body cannot handle the fructose. So you have table sugar, sucrose, and glucose. High fructose corn syrup is really 55% fructose and 45% glucose. And so the more fructose comes in there, the more insulin resistance, the higher the insulin levels get, the more that fructose and or glucose gets converted into fat. Now, glucose is a little bit more unique because there's more storage sites for glucose. Glucose can go into the muscle. It can get stored, and there's the muscle. You have about 300 or 350 grams or so on average of glucose storage in your body. You only have about 60 or 70 with the liver, and maybe about 10-20% throughout the body. So maybe you have 80 grams of storage with fructose. You have about 300 to 400 with glucose. And that changes depending upon how much exercise you do. The more you lift weights, the more you essentially wring out that sponge called your muscle. The more you wring out a sponge, the more absorbent it is in the future when you wipe something down that has water on it. In other words, when you wipe something up that has glucose on it, you have more storage for it. So the more you lift weights, the more resistance training, the more interval training, you're going to create larger muscles. One, you're going to be burning up the glucose in your muscle. And then two, you kind of create more reservoir. You wring out that muscle so you have more absorptive qualities. That's going to help more glucose. Doesn't quite help as much with fructose. So the more insulin resistant you are, that fructose really becomes a stressor on your body. So the more heavy you are, higher blood pressure, all of the metabolic syndrome side effects, right? Blood pressure, weight, waist circumference, higher glucose, right? All of those typical inflammatory markers. You could even say higher CRP, all those types of markers of inflammation. You really should keep that fructose down to 15 grams or less, maybe even 25 if you're kind of on the fence. And then really try to keep the carbohydrates lower. I mean, the benefit of going lower carbohydrate is the more the insulin levels drop, the more it's easy to burn fat for fuel. It's very hard for your body to upregulate lipolytic enzymes when insulin's high. Lipolytic means fat breaking down. Lipofat, lytic means to cut or break. So when you're releasing lipolytic enzymes that are designed to break down fat, it's very difficult to do that when insulin's high because insulin is like storage mode. So it's trying to take all this fat and it's storing everything, and you're going to be more preferentially burning glucose and or fructose when you're consuming more of these foods. So the goal is to keep these foods relatively low so we can tap more into our fat reserves. Also, the more ketones are up, it keeps our appetite in check. So the more we have good levels of ketones in our body, we have less cravings. Certain macronutrients have different apostatic feedback loops, meaning it allows us to feel more satiated. So the more proteins and good fats we eat, we make different compounds like CCK, peptide YY, adiponectin. These are apostatic feedback compounds that help us to feel satiated. The more satiated we are, the less food we eat. So it's not all about calories, because if you don't eat foods that allow you to have a good feedback loop to your brain and feel full, then you're constantly having to be in this state of feeling hungry. Yeah, you're cutting calories, but it's not sustainable, right? So the more you can keep the calories in check through feeling satiated, the better it is. So calories are a big deal, but it's not the cause, it's the effect. Right? The effect is we have good satiation by eating a good macronutrient ratio that allows us to tap into better fat. We're burning more fat for fuel. We're making more sustainable fuel sources, right? Ketones are going to be they're more stable. They're not up and down fluctuating like glucose is. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So really important to differentiate fructose, keep it 15 to 25 grams. On the lower side, the more insulin resistant and the more overweight and the more inflamed, the more blood pressure, the more issues that are going on, keep that fructose lower. Even if none, focus on getting most of your carbohydrates from non-starchy vegetables. Work on getting at least a palm to a fist of protein at every meal. And that's going to provide really good building blocks for your neurotransmitters, for your hormones. It's going to help keep you satiated. It's going to help release a lot of these good chemicals that allow you to feel full. And of course, make sure it is full fat in there. Good, healthy, high quality animal fats and proteins. All right, let's see what we have for questions here. Ashley writes in, what's the best thing to do when you're hypoglycemic due to adrenal insufficiency? First thing you can do is if you're hypoglycemic and you've tested it, you should be eating every 4 to 5 hours. Make sure you have healthy proteins and fats at every meal. Keep the carbohydrates down more to non-starchy vegetables, right? Broccoli, spinach, kale. If that is still creating a little bit of problems, you can add a little bit more carbohydrate, maybe a little handful of berries, tiny bit of sweet potato. See how you feel, see how you do. You can keep that meal a little bit tighter. Ashley says, I don't feel like I'm converting glycogen to glucose, and it makes me need to eat sugar every few hours. I know it isn't healthy. Yeah, make sure your protein and fat is dialed in. Make sure you start the day good, and then just dial in the carbs. You need a little bit of carbs. Just start with a little bit and work your way up. You can add a tiny bit of starch as well. See if that helps. Andrew writes in, hey, Dr. J, given the insulinogenic properties of rice, why is it that Japanese tend to not be overweight? So number one, rice is going to be primarily glucose. So you have a lot more reservoir for glucose in your body versus fructose. So glucose, easier, better reservoir. So you tend to have easier time with glucose, supporting glucose stimulating things or glucose converting things than fructose converting things, meaning fruit and the refined processed foods all convert down to fructose, and then you have the glucose from some of the starch sources. Also, it depends on your body type too. A lot of the Asians tend to be more ectomorphs, tend to have a greater ability to handle carbohydrates. Different cultures may not be able to handle that just because they did not evolve with those kind of foods in their environment. But again, there's still a lot of Asian people that are very overweight because if you overconsume the fructose and overconsume bad foods over time, you will become insulin resistant. And if you look at the history of Japanese, being a rice farmer, for instance, right, a lot of those jobs where these Asian people kind of evolved doing for hundreds of years. Rice farming is very, 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 very difficult and very physically strenuous job. So if you're doing a very difficult, strenuous job, you're going to be burning that glucose like crazy. So you got to look at the lifestyle factors too. Oliver writes in, what do you do for your cat's kidney issue? My dog has slightly high creatinine, over 10, but she's 14, so maybe normal. So number one thing you can do is just make sure the food's high quality. Cut out all dry food. The worst dry food is better than the best. The worst wet food is better than the best dry food. In other words, keep the dry food out, very unnatural. So if you can buy a higher quality wet food, then you're in the business. You can also look at, foods that tend to be a little bit more biologically appropriate for dogs. A lot of times the phosphorus for cats is a big stressor. There's a product called Kidney Gold that has some herbs in there that are very good. It has cordyceps mushrooms. It has cordyceps in there, and there's 2 more astragalus, and there's 1 more herb in there. Those are really, really good. And then you can always do kidney glandular tissue, has a really good nutrition in there as well. And then you can also do high dose fish oil. The high dose omega-3s will help reduce inflammation in the kidney as well. Hope that helps. And then, of course, some of the kidney foods are just a little bit lower in protein. So you can look at dropping that protein amount maybe from 40% to like 30%. Don't go too low, though. You go too low, then you start getting muscle breakdown from the animal, and that muscle breakdown then puts more stress on the kidneys as well, because now those amino acids from the muscles that are breaking down go to the kidneys. So it's this double-edged sword, but you don't want to go too low but not too high. Fiesta Fun writes in, what's the deal with all these eye floaters cramping or creeping up my eyes? What's the root cause? What are they? How to remove them? Any eye drops you recommend? Typically look at inflammation, look at insulin resistance. I'm not sure kind of where you're at, but you can look at getting those things under control with your diet. You know, really look at a lower carb, keto, paleo template. You can also up lutein. You can add in an herb called bilberry, astaxanthin. These are really important antioxidants. You can do it like OPCs, oligomeric proanthocyanidins, like grapeseed extract, really good antioxidants for the eye. You know, make sure you're getting a lot of the lutein, like, you know, at least 4 egg yolks a day would be really helpful too. Any thoughts on disulfiram on treating Lyme? I'm not sure about disulfiram. It sounds like a potential antibiotic. I would need more info on that. The Korvac writes, I know multiple things can cause constipation. What are some good ways to help transit time? So you can do simple things like magnesium. You can do things like ginger. These are all really good. There's more abrasive things like senna or cascara sagrada. You can just do moving, like just gentle air squats can be helpful. Probiotics can be helpful with transit time too. HCl and enzymes can also be helpful, and make sure you're chewing your food up and you're not eating when you're stressed. Is oregano oil effective in treating gut infections? If so, what's the daily dosage? Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's really good for fungus. High dose is really good for parasites. On my site, I have a product called GI Clear 5, which is a very potent emulsified oil of oregano. I'll do up to 6 capsules, even 9 for bigger parasites per day, usually for a 60-day time frame, and then we retest. So I don't recommend doing it all the time, though. Make sure it's part of a program where you're testing and treating and then retesting. It's better that way. Okay, excellent. Dr. J, what do you suggest for someone who wants to maintain or gain weight but needs to lower insulin resistance? So if you're looking for someone who wants to maintain or gain weight, the question is, it's hard to do both at the same time. But typically, if you're insulin resistant, for most people, you tend to have extra weight. Now, I see it in some women and some guys too, that may not be the case. The first thing is just make sure you're getting enough calories, number one, and then make sure those calories overall are going to be on the lower carbohydrate side. You can always drop the carbs and then up the calories just a little bit more. And just start with making the foundation of your carbs non-starchy vegetables, and just do a little bit extra fat to up the calories overall. Why are most B-complex products so low in dosage? Do you know if a B-complex that isn't that low across the board? I find most B vitamins are high across the board, like many 100% above. Part of that being is because B vitamins are water soluble, so you can pee them out. Hence the yellow urine. That's not a bad thing, because if your urine's not yellow and you're consuming a B vitamin, it means you're not getting enough B vitamins. That's what that means. My B vitamin synergy should have enough. It's got like 1000x on a couple of the B1, which is thiamine, B2, which is riboflavin, B3 is niacin, B5 is pantothenic acid, B6 pyridoxal hydrochloride, B9 is folate, B12 is methylfolate. Okay, why does my pants feel tight when I'm with women? I'm not sure. Need to know, did you just eat a meal? What's happening there? What's the timing? Do you have SIBO? Do you have poor digestion in general and you're just getting really stressed and maybe your digestion's off a little bit? I need a little more info. Andrew, you're welcome. Gustavo writes in, is it possible to stop taking antidepressants while you're in a healing protocol for the guts? What's the best way to do it? So how I handle antidepressants is I typically keep the dose where it's at. I fix all of the foundational issues, diet, lifestyle, digestion. We'll work on foundational nutrients. We'll test the brain. We'll test amino acids in the brain. We'll get a foundational protocol going there. Once we have good stability, inflammation's down, then we'll go back to the prescribing doctor and have them drop the dose. I don't like to be dropping antidepressants while doing a gut healing protocol, because that could the killing and stuff could be a little bit stressful on the body. So I don't want to come in there when we're creating potential stress and do another stress of pulling down the antidepressant. So I'd be careful with that. One at a time. Amelia writes in, best way to cool oats for reintroduction and digestibility. Not sure. I typically don't do any oats, but I mean, you could do the Bob's Red Mill oats. You can cook it, hot water, and let it cool off, and then just add it that way. That's going to be the easiest way to do it. Just make sure it's really cooked, and that'd be it. I wouldn't make it any more difficult than that. You can also add in more enzymes and acids to help with the digestive process there. I got a question on Facebook. Don't give pets vaccines if they've already had a couple of the rabies vaccines. Always do a titer test instead of vaccinations. Yeah, I agree. I do titer tests on my animals. When they say that they should get a vaccine, I run the titer and they still have antibodies like ridiculously high, which is crazy. Best kind of rice to try for reintroduction. Just start with a simple white rice. Simple white rice, because there's no extra anti-nutrients in there. You won't have a lot of B vitamins and such like you will get with wild rice, but there at least will be very little anti-nutrients. What do you think about homeopathic tinctures and about the fact that they contain alcohol? Is that a reason to worry? No, it's a very tiny amount. The alcohol is there for absorption. I think homeopathic tinctures can be very helpful, especially if people are sensitive. It can be really good. Kelly writes in, would you please recommend how many carbs for a 115-pound female trying to follow your low carb to help with histamine issues? Your enzymes are working well for me during the meals. So regarding carbohydrates, it's going to depend upon what your activity level is, Kelly. So you may want to look at kind of as a percent of just overall calories. If you're doing about 2,000 calories a day and you're like a 40-30-30, like 40 carbs, 30 proteins, 30 fats, then you're looking at closer to 200 grams of carbohydrate per day-ish. So you just got to look at how much activity. If your activity is lower, you may want to keep it 50 to 100. If your activity is higher, you may want to ratchet it up. Just start low, work your way up, and just adjust it according to where your activity is at. So I know you had pulled off a lot of your activity and you were tapering it up. So make sure you just adjust it accordingly. Start low, work your way up, and see how you feel and adjust it that way. That's going to be the best thing. But probably within a 40-30-30 range, right in that 30 to 40% carbohydrate range, maybe where you feel best. I wouldn't go as high as 60 unless you're doing a ton of exercise, which you may not be ready for yet. Beauty Queen writes in, I have a high parathyroid. How can I lower my calcium and vitamin D are normal? So you have high parathyroid. How can I lower it? My calcium and vitamin D are normal. So first things first is, what's parathyroid hormone doing? Parathyroid hormone are increasing calcium in the blood. All right, parathyroid hormone breaks down calcium off a bone. So I would try to maybe increase your vitamin D a little bit more. And that may help with your calcium. And if your calcium is a little bit higher, you may need less parathyroid hormone to mobilize that calcium. So it could be because calcium or vitamin D is a little lower. That's number one. So I'd work on upping vitamin D. Number two, I'd look at your thyroid and make sure there's no autoimmunity, because when you attack your thyroid, well, your parathyroids are right super close. That could easily be affected by that as well. Holly writes in, what's your opinion on yogurts that market themselves as having high probiotics? Coworkers trying to tell me that Activa is better than Megaspore. Well, I mean, a lot of the yogurts are not going to have the best probiotics because they're going to be pasteurized, and the pasteurization will kill a lot of the beneficial bacteria. I like the GT Dave's one. GT Dave's is really good. They have really good bacteria in them. Kalina is really good. There's a couple of really good brands out there, probiotic-wise. It's hard because sometimes they're mandated with some of the pasteurization, so you may not get a ton of probiotics out of there. That's why you can look at other fermentable foods, and I do think taking a oral probiotic is going to be the best, just more potent. Any tips to avoid strep B during pregnancy and delivery? Yeah, increase probiotics during pregnancy. Increase lactobacillus and bifidobacter species during pregnancies, and you'll be in a much better situation. Lots of studies on that. In my line, we'll do probioflora, and higher doses of that during pregnancy have really shown to reduce strep B. You can just type in like lactobacillus, bifidobacter species, and you're going to see a reduction in strep B. What's your protocol before, during pregnancy for my wife? We want to start a family. What minerals to take? So a good prenatal. A really good prenatal will be excellent. That'll have higher calcium and iron as well. Adequate folate, good B vitamins. Number 2, make sure diet's solid, make sure digestion's solid, and make sure you're relatively healthy. If you're not healthy, then you may want to look at dialing in other things before you jump into trying to get pregnant, because the baby's going to take a lot of nutrition away from the moms. We want to make sure that there's good nutrition, there's not a ton of stress, so we have more to give the baby. So if you're in a great situation, do those things. I typically would even run some intercellular nutrient panels to assess the woman's actual nutrients at a cellular level. So we'll run like a SpectraCell or an ion or a Nutri-Eval to assess what's happening. Ashley, you're welcome. Fiesta writes in, do you recommend detox during pregnancy? No, I do not. How about taking some binders? A little bit of binders could be okay, especially with potential food toxins you may be getting exposed to. Yeah, a little bit of binders could be okay, like an activated charcoal or a clay, because it's staying more in your gut. It's not going to kind of go systemic and stir things up, but I wouldn't go high dose, and I wouldn't do it every day. But if you are potentially going to get exposed to something, I think a gentle binder could be helpful, but I wouldn't do anything like significant. Like I wouldn't fire up glutathione or anything like that. Disulfiram is the active component in the drug called Antabuse, which is used to stop alcoholics from drinking. Check it out. Apparently a breakthrough in treating Lyme. All right, I'll take a look at it. I've used a lot of other herbs. Cryptolopis, Sitta acuta, cat's claw. Those are really great herbs. High-dose reishi, all really good things to help with Lyme. What supplements or lifestyle changes can I make to avoid the flu during pregnancy? I had a signed refusal. I signed a refusal for a flu shot. So with pregnancy, you could always do higher dose vitamin C. That'd be acceptable. You could always do some probiotic and make sure your vitamin D levels are great. Make sure extra sleep and all these things are dialed in. There are a couple of things that are more questionable, like reishi or medicinal mushrooms. They are questionable. I had my wife do a very low dose when she'd feel a little bit immunocompromised when she was pregnant, but I would not go high. High dose, I recommend that because there are some cultures that have consumed medicinal mushrooms prophylactically for a long time, but I would never go higher dose. So very low dose medicinal mushroom, probiotics, vitamin D, higher dose vitamin C, no external vitamin A, because vitamin A is teratogenic, can cause birth defects. You could do a little bit of vitamin A and some cod liver oil, would not supplement greater than 10,000 IUs during pregnancy though. Hope that helps. Kelly, you're welcome. Jan writes in this, camu powder, a good source of vitamin C. It's low in fructose like most berries. If you're doing it powder form, it wouldn't really have any fructose. I think that'd all be extracted out. And yeah, camu is good from what I understand. Sean writes in, what would it mean to have a high fecal IgA level after treating dysbiosis and feeling a lot better? It just could be your immune system is revved up because you've been killing a lot of stuff and your immune system has been kind of rising to the equation to kind of attack things. Or rising to the occasion, not equation. You're welcome, Beauty Queen. IgA was 2,300. Yeah, that's high. Yeah, so you could just be stimulating that immune response to come after and attack some of these things. Mindy, you're welcome. Adrian writes in, do you think a person who doesn't tolerate chlorella could gradually take it anyway until the body adjusts itself after it starts to tolerate it? Yeah, you just start really low. So like if you're having a problem with one capsule, you may want to start off at like a 16th or an 1/8 of a capsule and then just go up from there. What would the 3 pillars of digestion to heal the gut be? HCl, ox bile, and pancreatin, and digestive enzymes? Yep. Yeah, I mean, pancreatins I would consider in the family of enzymes, so HCl and enzymes is typically great. I only add extra ox bile if we're seeing a lot of floating stools or if we don't have a gallbladder or we're seeing increased steatocrit. Yeah, great question there. All right, excellent. I think we hit all the major things. Why do you have to keep reishi mushroom at a low dose? What will a high dose be? It's just because of med-legal stuff. There's just not a lot of studies on pregnant women taking supplements or medications for obvious reasons. No one wants to test something that could have negative consequences on their kids, on their future kids. So that's the reason why. You don't have a lot of data on it. So I always just am extra conservative anytime I'm recommending something that could potentially be an issue. Low probability. I gave it to my wife, but I wouldn't recommend any patients go higher. Can you explain how important the lymph is? What is the lymph? The lymph's the interplay between the blood and the tissue. So things from the tissue have to come out and they have to go into the blood. So you have this lymphatic fluid interplay between the tissue and the blood. And the more inflammation there is, the more that lymph becomes kind of like very stasis, very like kind of molasses-ish. And so the more we keep that lymph moving, whether it's through movements or drinking enough water or giving herbs like burdock or ginger, these things really help the lymph move well, which can keep a lot of the toxins kind of flushing out. And it keeps that interplay between the tissue and the blood moving well. Adrian, you're welcome. Thank you. Karen writes in, could resistant exercise and weights lower insulin resistance and build body mass for weight gain? Yes, it could, but you just have to make sure that you are getting enough nutrition, enough calories overall. Because if you have insulin resistance and you're exercising and you're keeping the carbs on the lower side too, you could lose a lot of weight. So it just depends upon where you're at and what your goals are. Hey, Ashley, yep, great. I'm glad that's helpful, and I'm glad you're appreciating this. Very good. Kelly writes in, opinion on wheatgrass. It's fine. I think wheatgrass doesn't start to accumulate gluten until after like day 13 or 14. So as long as it's very immature wheatgrass and you know it's gluten-free, then it should be okay. There's some good chlorophyll in there, which has very high levels of magnesium, which are good. Mindy writes in, can you do a video on treating EBV in children and adults? It seems to be behind so many autoimmune diseases. Yeah, it depends. I mean, a lot of people have exposure to Epstein-Barr, which is essentially mono, and it's just 80% of the population has exposure. Is it a problem? Is it not? I mean, you get guys like Anthony Williams. I think it's the problem for everything. But I find that there's a compromised immune system, and then things like EBV and Lyme become an issue. So is it really an issue? Maybe. I always treat all the foundational things, and then a lot of times people just get better without having to go after those things. Some people will go after them. But others, once you get the gut and nutrition and inflammation and infections under control, sometimes we'll go after that. Some people have an 80 or 90% resolution where it's like, we're good. Plus, a lot of the herbs that I'll use for going after like gut issues, they have a lot of crossover for being antiviral, like golden seal and olive leaf and berberine and maybe silver. They all have really good antiviral effects, which can help knock down EBV as well. How do you combat letting the gut heal by waiting 4 or more 6 hours after getting enough calories and avoiding hypoglycemia? I'm 6'6", 220, and I find it hard on a low-carb diet sometimes to heal dysbiosis. So it depends. So number one, make sure you're eating enough so you can last 4 or 5 hours, okay? If you have really bad hypoglycemia, there's probably also adrenal issues, and your adrenals should be looked at and supported as well. So if you can't go longer than 4 or 5 hours, number one, make sure you're able to digest that food. Make sure you're able to break it down. If you're having a problem with that, that food is probably just too much for what your body can handle. You may have to do shorter, smaller meals, number one. You're going to have to support the adrenals, number two, and you're going to have to dial in digestive support so you can break down that food if you're having a hard time handling it. Ali Mo writes in, my husband had 46 heart rate this morning. What do you think? I mean, it's on the lower side, but people that are healthier tend to have lower heart rate, so it's hard to say, right? If his stroke volume is good and his heart's pumping a lot, you can get away with a lower heart rate. Dr. J, what brand of vitamin C do you recommend? Currently looking for a new one. I mean, there's lots of good ones out there. Obviously, I'm biased. I have my vitamin C Synergy, which is going to have high-quality vitamin C. It's going to have a lot of bioflavonoids, rutin, hesperidin, those kind of things in there. But there's all kinds of really good vitamin C esters out there that are buffer with other minerals, which are really helpful. So any of a really good brand, you'll pay a little bit more for a good vitamin C, but it's worth it. Kelly writes in, great improvement since working with them. Oh, excellent, Kelly. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. Yeah, Kelly's also a patient. So is Ashley. Very good. And I typically won't ever say it unless you guys say it, just for patient confidentiality. Is spirulina a good addition to a bone broth protein? Yeah, spirulina is great. Spirulina is an algae. It's going to have some really good nutrients in it. I have no problem with you adding it into a bone broth smoothie. I haven't added any type of green, but think I need to. That's fine. Yep, I have no problem with that. Sebastian, you're welcome as well. Any other questions, guys? If not, I'm going to go upstairs and grab my lunch. I got a nice salad with some chicken and some avocado, and my dessert's going to be a couple of blueberries and some coconut yogurt with some cinnamon on top. And I'm going to have one of those keto cups. Those things are really good. Less than a gram per sugar per one. Those are great. Thanks a lot, Mindy. Really appreciate it. Any last questions, y'all? I'll be back tomorrow morning, Friday, fun day, with a 9:30 a.m. video. So look for me there. I'll try to get out the reminder later on tonight so you guys see it. Oh, Desiree wrote in, my husband's on week 2 of AIP and has had a dull headache almost the whole time. Any idea why? Hard to say. So you'd have to look at his diet. What was it and what is it now? Like, was there a major shift in macronutrients? Like, was he on like kind of a higher carb diet and now his diet's really lower carb? First thing I would do is just try to match the carbohydrate. So if he was eating like 100 grams of carbs a day, I would try to keep his carbs at 100 grams a day, because it could just be a really big shift in the macros that he's throwing them off. Number 2, just make sure minerals are adequate. You know, potassium and magnesium are the big ones. Those would be the first 2 things I would say. So look at macros and look at minerals. Excellent, Sean. Really appreciate it. Patricia writes in, how is the best way to support your adrenals? Well, number 1, diet and lifestyle is the first, right? Good sleep, good hydration, not making your blood sugar go up and down like this, not over-exercising. Those are great things. And then supplement-wise, we have herbal glandulars. We have herbal adaptogens, ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng, eleuthero, holy basil. We have vitamins and minerals that help the adrenals, magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, B complex. And then we have glandular tissue like whole adrenal cortex or the whole adrenal gland. And then we have things like pregnenolone and DHEA and maybe even things like progesterone that can be really helpful too. But I recommend those based on lab testing. So, but you can't go wrong with like B vitamins and a good nutrient support. LMO writes in, stumped my toe over a month ago and it's still swollen. Is that normal? Well, you may have broken your toe. I mean, there's not much you can do with that, but you could always do, like if you have access to cold laser or if you have access to like pulse electromagnetic frequency, something like that would help reduce the inflammation. Is spirulina okay for Hashis? I mean, it's an allergy. I think it would be okay. Patricia writes in, Patricia, best way to support your adrenals, please. All the things I just said above. Adrian writes in, can I tell if I have MTHFR without testing? Are there any clues one may see? I want to take a supplement with 250 micrograms of folate, and I'm cautious about taking it. So, number 1, if you run an organic acid test and you see increase in methylmalonate or 4-aminoglutamate, that could be a sign there's some MTHFR issues. I would never do anything with folic acid in it. I would try to always do folate or activated LMTHF folate. Try to avoid folic acid. Some people still say folic acid on their products, but they're really not. It's like really folate. So just make sure it's no added folic acid, because your body has to convert that and activate it. And people that have MTHFR issues may create some cancer metabolites as a result. Yep, check out I think you mean rhodiola. Rhodiola for tea, alternative, as well as healing adrenals. Yep, I'm a big fan of rhodiola and different adaptogenic teas. Tulsi tea is another one that has holy basil in it, which is a really good adaptogen, which helps your adrenals too. All right, excellent. Last question. What cell phone chip stickers cases do you recommend to use in reducing this 5G EMF? I have one on my old phone. I just got the iPhone 11 Pro. It's up here doing the Facebook feed. I have the Q-Link on that one. Now I got to figure out a new spot because the whole screen is active screen. So I'm going to have to find a new one. But yeah, Q-Link was the one I've been using for like the last 5-6 years. You are welcome, Adrian. All right, guys, I'm going to go grab some food. You guys have an amazing day. I'll be back tomorrow morning. All right, y'all. Take care. Bye.